Today we have with us Josh Bazell. Josh is he has an BA in English Literature and Writing from Brown University and an MD from Columbia. Currently, he's a resident at the University of California in San Francisco, just down the way. And he wrote Meet the Reaper while completing his internship at a hospital, not at all like the one that is described in the book. Meet the Reaper has been described as a hypochondriac's nightmare and a reader's dream, and it's its first book, and I believe he's working on a second. So please welcome today Josh Bazell. So let me just connect here. Pocket that.
Okay. Wait, so this is actually, I need to stand at the podium too?
Yeah, so
Okay. Hi, I'm Josh Bazell. Thanks for having me. That's my dog, Lottie, by the way, who appears in various guises in the book several times. I'm sorry that this is a lunch hour thing, because I was going to talk about actually an incident that began for me about 2 months ago when I got barfed on by a kid with swine flu.
Bring it on.
Okay, I will do that. I was on an airplane and they asked for a doctor and I was asleep. And so I said, oh, I'm a doctor. I mean, I woke up from it, and the two people who announced themselves on the plane were me and I'm on this sort of indeterminate leave from my psychiatry residency at UCSF, and the other guy was a cardiologist who was Sikh and had a turban. So they were like, we'll take the guy without the turban. And I ended up taking care of this kid, which was fairly straightforward, had mostly to do with the people on the plane wanting to stone him to death for having swine flu. He was about 9 and had been put on this plane by himself by his mother, who also had swine flu. I mean, it was an ugly story, but it certainly wasn't the kid's fault. He was so ill that the flight attendants just noticed him in his seat as being sick. So, you know, I spent some time with him, gave him some fluids and so forth. And the next day I started to feel a little under the weather because I'm as hypochondriacal as the next person. And I called in a prescription for myself, which is something we can do for non-controlled substances, for Tamiflu. And when I went to pick it up, I was told by the pharmacy that my insurance company said I had no insurance and hadn't for 6 months. I'm on COBRA at the moment, and what's interesting is I've made 4 COBRA payments, and all 4 of them have resulted in the insurance company saying they never got payment and cutting me from the rolls, but also cashing the checks. And it wasn't this time a particularly big deal because I've been through it 3 times before. I know what to do in terms of getting the check copies and who to call and stuff. It took about 10 hours of work over the course of a week. And then they said it was a mistake, which is what has happened the previous times. But what's kind of distressing, because it's not a big deal, it wasn't in this case. I mean, I didn't certainly die of swine flu. What's kind of distressing is the clear implication that if I were, say, in a car accident, and someone were to call my insurance company, which incidentally they do from the ambulance, and it absolutely changes the course of your health care from the moment they find you in terms of what hospital they send you to and so forth. If they had done that, the insurance company would have said I was not insured, and it would have just been a very different course of care. And it occurred to me to wonder not so much how insurance companies can operate like that, because they're companies and they're going to be as rapacious as they're allowed to be. I'm not that interested in the individuals who work for these companies, because I think it's, you know, people are scared right now and they're very short-sighted. And there's also this thing, there's this sort of epidemic in the country of this thing called family values, which means that if you care for your family, you don't have to care for anybody else. But I was slightly curious about why the rules are so lax in terms of insurance companies. And the same thing is true with pharmaceutical companies. I don't know if you guys know this, but basically the issue with pharmaceutical companies is advertising. They all spend more on advertising than they do on research. They advertise to doctors. They advertise, oh, hello. Sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. So they advertise to consumers directly, which is legal in this country. It's also legal in New Zealand. It's not legal in any other industrialized country, but it will be soon because the internet has made it basically impossible to keep advertisements out of any specific country. And, these rules that they have, the pharmaceutical industry in particular, the rule that really favors them is one that the FDA has, which is that if you invent a new medication, all you have to do to get it approved is show that it has some advantage over placebo. You don't have to test it against medications that are already on the market. The result of this is if you invent a medication that works 1/6 as well as something that's already out there and has 10 times as many side effects, you can nonetheless spend $1 billion advertising it and make reliably $2.1 billion. And obviously they're going to do this because they're allowed to do this. And they're allowed to do this because they pay our Congress people. There's been an interesting jump this year. In 2008, the healthcare industry paid members of Congress about $95 million. This year so far, it's about $390 million. And they get, they get what they want out of that. They also do other interesting things. Sanofi Pasteur is a particularly interesting company in that they got $10 million from the bailout, which they seem to have spent entirely on hiring DLA Piper, which at the time was starring former Senate Majority Leader Dick Armey, the Republican. And what they did for Sanofi was send fake protesters to town hall meetings this summer, which was incredibly effective. I just started wondering after my own insurance run-in, why any of this is legal. And I just found the answer to be somewhat interesting. I thought, perhaps there ought to be laws against buying off your congresspeople. And it turns out that there in fact are laws. There are many laws. One in particular is U.S. Code 18201, which says that you cannot give any member of Congress, past, present, or future, any consideration in return for a decision that they make in the course of their duties. And the Senate Ethics Committee handbook sums this up as saying, don't take anything of value from anyone for doing anything. So it would seem sort of on the face of it that for these guys, when you start out in the Senate, you make about $185,000 a year, which seems like a fair amount to me, given that the job is apparently so easy you can run for president full-time while doing it. But just for comparison, it's about 4 times as much as you can make as a firefighter in the U.S. after 20 years on the job anywhere in the country. But this amount for key members of Congress is absolutely dwarfed by the money coming in from these companies. And why is that legal? Well, there are various loopholes. For instance, the major one is this sort of fiction that if you donate to a candidate's campaign, you are not giving them something of any value. This is the way it's sort of treated. Money goes into campaigns. Incidentally, though, the limit that a campaign can accept is $2,500 from a person and $0 from a corporation. You have to launder the money through political action committees, which is done all the time. And the basis of this acceptance of this practice is twofold. One is the argument that corporations have to be able to donate to campaigns somehow to level the playing field. Otherwise, new candidates will have no chance of raising money, which I think is a legitimate concern, although it's hard to see how it actually works since the incumbents are so heavily favored in most Senate races right now, and they get the most of the money, which sort of causes the system to persist. But the more interesting concept is that the corporations have First Amendment rights and also 14th Amendment protections. Are you guys familiar with the 14th Amendment? Basically, this was an amendment in 1868 that was designed entirely to overturn the Dred Scott decision and give black people rights in the U.S. after the Civil War. And it did that fairly well. And then in 1886, right in our neck of the woods, there was a law case called Santa Rosa versus Pacific Southern Railroad, in which the railroad was saying that they didn't want to, they wanted a tax break from land that they owned that was losing value. They wanted to amortize their losses as taxes. And they did win the case. And the decision doesn't mention the 14th Amendment at all, but there's something called a head note, which is written by the stenographer in the case, who interestingly was employed at the time by the Southern Pacific Railroad. And he said, in passing, that the justices felt strongly that corporations, like individuals, should have 14th Amendment protections. This is one of the most important Supreme Court decisions of all time. I mean, it's not even a decision, it's quasi. Numerous justices have pointed it out as being possibly the most operative law in the country. There's a case going on right now called Citizens United versus Federal Election Committee, which is more commonly known as the People versus Hillary Clinton case. Do you guys know this? During the recent election cycle, this group called Citizens United made a movie about Hillary Clinton, a sort of hatchet piece that the Federal Elections Commission said that they could not show within 60 days of the election because you can't air issue ads by third parties within 60 days of an election. And they are suing right now. The case has reached the Supreme Court. Actually, the arguments have already been heard before the start of the session, which was, is it still October? It is, which was earlier this month. It was actually on September 9th, there was an emergency session. Sonia Sotomayor was sworn in early just for this session, and they went and heard these arguments. But there's no, and it's possible that the Supreme Court will say, well, this is too specific a case and we're going to deal with this case and not the larger case law. But it's also likely, given the makeup of the Supreme Court, that they're going to uphold 14th Amendment rights for corporations. Incidentally, the original case in 1886, if the Supreme Court really did say that corporations should have 14th Amendment, means that corporations got equal rights and citizenship protection well before women did, on the order of about 40 years. So this is the issue. This is what we're facing. What's interesting to me about corporations is that they're kind of like vampires. I mean, not in the parasitic way, although certainly pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies are that, but just in the sense that when you give a person protection and you give them citizenship, they eventually tend to die, and that sort of evens things out at least a little bit. Depending on what the inheritance laws are. With corporations, that's just not the case. Corporations can theoretically go on forever. And they don't have to, there are not issues with movement of their resources. So that's really kind of what we're up against. I should say my book, Beat the Reaper, is a sort of noir comedy about hospital life and the Mafia, which has nothing to do with any of this. But one thing that I was kind of wondering, because when you work as a physician, there's this sort of scorpions in a bottle scenario that you often face where the patients are furious at you. Doctors are often really angry, too. And I think it's mostly because they're the two parties that they see. And things are not going well with healthcare right now. I'd say in the book, at one point, there's a patient in a very fancy ward at this hospital, and I make the point, which incidentally is accurate, that these fancy wards often have the worst health care in the hospital. They tend to be sort of retirement legs for people who are done with their work elsewhere in the hospital. And the comment that I make is that if you don't believe that health care can be worse, even if you pay much more money for it, you should forget these polls about how the U.S. is the 37th ranked healthcare system and just take a look at Michael Jackson. I was in Spain 2 weeks ago, and the translation of the book, they use a different verb for take a look at. fijarse, which is sort of like fixate on, and the implications seem to be there that I had somehow predicted that Jackson was going to die, which is not at all the case, but was very exciting for me at the time. They were asking me, who else was going to go and that kind of thing. Why am I on this topic? I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting. I mean, to me, Google's sort of fascinating. Google is at the very beginning of its lifespan, which we don't get to see all that often. It's also a company, I mean, we have an idea of what Microsoft was like at its absolute inception, but it also seems to have been run really by two guys for years. Whereas Google very quickly has enjoyed many more employees. And it's just, it's curious to watch from the outside, particularly if you're from San Francisco. So I'm curious, maybe you don't want to answer this on tape, but is there a sense of sort of democratic governance in this company? Like, do you guys feel like you could shift company policy? Okay, I'll take that as a neither nor. I mean, I can tell you as a civilian, a non-Google member, the question that's on my mind is there, because Google has this motto of what is it? Don't do evil, don't be evil, don't see, hear, or speak. Right? Okay. Do no evil. And it seems to me they've done pretty well at that at the time. I mean, obviously there have been these sort of tough squabbles with the China situation and so forth. But the question is Google going to get tired of being Google at some point and sell the information base, which would be really only one evil act. But it would be pretty evil. It would go backwards and forwards in time and would negate a lot of what we love about Google so much. So as a side note, I would like to simply say, please don't do that. And that's pretty much all I have to say. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Can you talk about writing the book at all? Did you do it while you were working in the position? Yeah,
I wrote this book during my last year of med school and my first year of residency, which is also called internship. It seems, I mean, people always say, oh, how did you do that? That's so insane. It's not that insane. The last year of medical school is relatively cushy. And even the thing that's great about internship is it is at times extremely time-consuming, but it tends also to be very ordered. Like, you know in advance on a month-to-month basis what your free time is going to look like. And if you're willing to have sort of no life outside of writing and medicine, which I was willing to do at the time, I mean, it really wasn't, it was not so much of a hassle. I've been writing my whole life. I started wanting to be a novelist when I was 9, after reading The Godfather and Jaws, both of which sort of manifest heavily in this book. And I've worked as a professional writer for 16 years. Most of that was in movies. This is my first published book. So it was pretty reflexive.
What led you to want to eventually go from that goal of wanting to be a full-time writer to medicine?
I always wanted to go to med school for several reasons. One, just that it was interesting. Like, I wanted to know that stuff, and I found like I wasn't really able to learn it on my own. I mean, it's almost like a drive for trivia on the one hand. The other issue was I was in a PhD program in English literature at Duke, and I was so depressed that I thought, if I'm going to be this depressed for this many years, I might as well go into medicine, where whatever I'm feeling, at least I'm helping somebody else in the course of a day. And I have to say, medicine is fantastic for that. I mean, it really is. Like, it really doesn't matter how you're feeling. You really can actually, I mean, you can make a slight difference each day almost by default, and that was very helpful to me. It's tough now that I'm on leave, actually. I mean, what's weird is, like, I'm on leave. I'm not even doing that much writing. I'm doing, I mean, thankfully, the book has been a big hit worldwide. It's out in 35 languages now. And the result is that I often travel to countries that are releasing it on these sort of staggered schedules. And it often seems like my full-time job now is publicity, which is not something I ever had an interest in. I'm not particularly good at it, and it just is. It's just interesting. I mean, on the axis of how one lives one's life, from say a zero of I'm going to go into banking, I'm going to marry somebody else in banking, we're going to get a nanny to take care of our child who will eventually go into banking, and say at the top, like, you know, I'm going to be a nun and help the poor in India. I do feel like I backslid a little bit in the last year. Sir?
In terms of reforming the healthcare system, how do you assess the strengths and weaknesses of fictional writing versus nonfiction? There's some authors that have MDs really focused on this.
Right. Well, fictional writing is a lot easier to do. I wonder sometimes if it's sheer laziness that drives me down the fictional route, although I love fiction. I mean, I read fiction all the time. I have written a series of essays about the healthcare debate, so-called. It's not really a debate. I mean, any doctor who actually cares about his or her patients knows that single payer is the way to go, and a public option is the sort of second best. I mean, there is no debate other than corporations successfully advertising and buying senators. I have written about it. I have much less success as a nonfiction writer. I do occasional pieces in the New York Times, which is fun, but they like me to be sort of less serious. I assume that that's what you mean. It's sort of editorializing rather than publishing studies.
I was thinking about like some of those articles in the New Yorker magazine. I don't recall the name of the individual, but you know, it's a professor of Harvard Medical School, and he gets published. Yeah, exactly. And you know,
sorry, who? Atul Gawande is a surgeon at Harvard who has written frequently, and obviously Malcolm Gladwell does a lot also.
Yeah, right. And I'm just curious about your perspective in terms of impact. I mean, there's impact to all kinds of different venues, like sort of fiction versus, you know, the nonfiction quarterly article.
I think also it's a little like I did a talk that ended up being somewhat of a debate with a farm rep recently because the farm rep had gotten up and said, we haven't published this, but we have data that not only is our product better, other corporations' products are harming people. It was about osteoporosis. And that's fiction, right? I mean, they may have such data, you know, they may have written that data down 5 minutes ago on a napkin. I mean, so in a little bit, it's like the Calvin and Hobbes, they lie, we lie kind of scenario, where there are certain things you can get across in fiction that you cannot get across in an essay. I think things like thought patterns. I mean, you can interview people extensively and try and capture that. But to really mock up what somebody is thinking in a situation in real time, I should say that although there are some inaccuracies in the book, there are some intentional ones, and also I'm sure some unintentional ones. There's a lot of facts in there. I mean, I really do go out of my way to make it as accurate as possible. Sure.
You tossed out a comment there that the single-payer system is undoubtedly or very
right.
Better than the option. Could you just, or you said specifically by doctors who care about their patients.
Right. Sure. Just in case anybody doesn't know what this is, a single-payer healthcare system is one in which there is no insurance. There is no gamble. You're not putting up money because you think something might happen to you, and they're not taking your money hoping that either nothing happens to you or that they can deny that something happened to you when something happened to you, or fail to take responsibility for it. Single payer means the government pays for health care. They are not paying for insurance, they're paying for actual health care. If you go into the hospital, you got a broken leg, they pay the doctor. What we're looking at is some sort of very watered down insurance system. I mean, almost by definition, these corporations that make so very much money are parasitic. The difference, these are companies, the way an insurance company makes money is by making this gamble with you and then pushing the issue to try and win on each case. I mean, there's somebody in an office all the time trying to figure out how to not pay for something that, let's admit it, in some cases is fraudulent, but in most cases isn't. And just the idea that you can take out that parasite from the loop, it would be such an enormous savings, not only in terms of money, but also time. I mean, dealing with an insurance company is absolutely maddening. And they can, like this thing where they 4 times in a row said that they didn't get my check that they had cashed. At a certain point, you got to stop thinking that's incompetence, because never once have they said, oh, we got 2 checks from you. You got to start thinking this is somebody who's looking at the bottom line and has a full-time job of figuring out essentially how to rip people off. And it just seems like getting rid of that situation is not only theoretically better, but it works better in other countries. Sure.
And actually, if you could try to repeat the question if possible, just to pick it up for you.
Oh, sure.
With regards to research on the book, and obviously, you being a doctor, being in med school, and you're able to dive in on that side. As far as the Mafia side, did you turn as a Shylock at any point, or how did you go about it?
No, I mean, I have a couple of real-world, underworld connections. They're very minor. I grew up in downtown Manhattan with, in a neighborhood where there were a lot of guys who wanted you to think they were mobsters. I don't know if they were, and the extent to which they were was never really clear. I mean, Vinny the Chin was clearly an actual mobster. He lived about 2 blocks from me. He was this guy who would wear a bathrobe on the street so that if he got indicted, he could claim that he was crazy. He wore this bathrobe for my entire childhood and then got indicted, and it didn't work. His actual last name was Gigante. I additionally used to work for the chief medical examiner's office in New York City, so I've seen some of the crime stuff from that angle, and I've spent a lot of time with police officers. All that said, the real source of my information is this subgenre of Mafia witness protection tell-all, which is the most disgusting subgenre of books I've ever come across. There are these books, people go into the witness protection program, they write a book, not least of which, because you make very little money generally in the witness protection program, unless, like Sammy the Bull, you're running the biggest ecstasy ring in the country or something. And these books are all about how sorry these guys are that they committed these horrible acts, but they're not really actually sorry at all. They just want to brag about how they used to be able to get people beaten up and used to get good tables at restaurants and stuff. And the hypocrisy is just, like, you want to take a shower after you read these books. But there's a lot of them. And I continue to take the hit for the public good of reading. One thing that's really interesting is people who have identified themselves to me after the book came out as people with violent backgrounds or criminal backgrounds who have become healthcare professionals. I haven't seen a doctor who used to be a hitman, but I've seen bank robbers who are now physician's assistants and stuff, and it's really interesting. And often it's very emotional to talk to them because they tend to be sort of the opposite of these scumbags in the protection program. These are people who really changed their life, usually from a religious conversion. Okay.
You're working on a second book now?
I am working on the second book now.
Can you disclose that in a similar type of work genre?
Oh, yeah, it's actually a sequel. It's a continuation. It's not a sequel in the sense of this is a series character who's like exactly the same in every book. But it does take place afterwards. I mean, he has taken the damage emotionally and physically that he's taken in this book, and that carries forward. So it's quite a different book, actually. But I'm working on it. Mr. Sai, Dr. Sai.
Have you given talks to primarily physician audiences versus, primarily crime noir boy audiences? How does the response generally differ?
The question is do I primarily give talks to physicians or to readers? It's about 50-50. It does tend to be quite different. Often if I go to a bookstore, I'll actually read from the book or do some other lame thing, to sort of expose people to it. Recently, the difference between the two audiences has really become minimal because everybody's so freaked out about healthcare. Or if they're not freaked out, I sort of make it my personal business to freak them out. Anyway, thank you guys so much for your time. Thanks for the interest.